Every civilization has stories they're proud of, tales of heroes, gods, and grand victories that define who they are. These are the legends carved in stone and sung around fires for generations. And then there are the others, the stories never written down, the ones never finished, the ones never told twice. Across the world, in cultures that never met, an identical, unspoken agreement was made. This one particular story must not be completed, not because it was violent or gruesome, but because it listens. Tonight, you're going to hear it, not as it was meant to be told, but as it was hidden. Anthropologists and folklorists once believed that fear was local, that our monsters, our ghosts, and our demons were shaped by the geographies around Usta. The vast oceans, the desolate plains, a community's nightmares were unique to their corner of the world. Until they found the pattern, an impossibly terrifying pattern that defied all logic. They found it in isolated mountain tribes in the Andes, in ancient coastal villages in Southeast Asia, and among nomadic desert cultures in Africa. Civilizations separated by vast oceans and entire centuries, yet all bound by one identical, sacred rule. There exists a story, they all warned, that must never be spoken in full. The rules were eerily consistent. You must not tell it at night. You must not tell it when you are alone. You must never speak it near mirrors or any reflective surface. And you must never, ever let it be heard by children. The methods of suppression varied. Some cultures attempted to erase it from memory completely, punishing anyone who even hinted at it. Others, believing it was too dangerous to forget entirely, allowed it to be told only once per generation, in a highly controlled ritual, always stopping before the final part. They understood something crucial. The danger wasn't in hearing the story. The danger was in being noticed by it. The act of telling it was like lighting a beacon in the dark, and you never knew what that beacon might attract. The story was a key, and finishing it turned a lock somewhere in reality. The forbidden story has no name. It never names what it describes, because to name something is to give it shape. To give it shape is to give it permission to exist. Instead, the story speaks only in behaviors, in effects, in feelings. It describes a presence that listens when it is remembered. It begins to move when it is feared, and it waits, patiently, when it is spoken about. The elders in these varied cultures all described it in a similar way. It doesn't arrive from somewhere else. The story simply helps it realize it was already there, with you, all along. It's like waking up a sleepwalker. They were always in the room, but now they are aware of you. The closer the storyteller comes to the ending of the tale, the closer something else comes to you. Not in distance, but in awareness. It begins to see you as clearly as you are beginning to see it. It's a process of mutual recognition, and you are the one who initiates it. So, what happened when the rule was broken? What became of the villages, the tribes, the people who either forgot the warning or chose to defy it? They didn't vanish in a flash of light. They didn't collapse into ruin or succumb to a mysterious plague. No, what happened was far more unsettling. The communities just continued, but quietly. Observers and the few who fled told similar tales. The people in these places stopped arguing. They stopped laughing. They stopped mourning their dead. Most disturbingly, they stopped asking questions. An unnatural calm settled over everything. Fear didn't increase. It disappeared entirely, replaced by a placid, empty acceptance. The animals were the first to notice. Birds would no longer nest in the village trees. Dogs and cats would flee, and livestock would become agitated and sick. Then, the children changed. They spoke less and less, their games becoming silent and still. They would stare for hours at nothing in particular, their eyes vacant. The nights, people said, felt longer than the days, as if time itself was being stretched and distorted. Then, one by one, the people began to leave. They didn't run or scream in terror. They packed their belongings calmly, methodically, as if they were leaving for a long-planned journey they had simply forgotten about until now. They would walk away, never looking back. once they left, no one who knew them could remember why they had ever mattered. Their memory, their impact, their very existence in the hearts of others would just fade to nothing. They went, just gone. It was as if they had never been. Less than a century ago, a researcher stumbled upon the story, the same one we've been discussing, and he did something no one had done for generations. He secretly recorded it. He wrote everything down in a series of notebooks, capturing the tale from one of the last known keepers of the tradition. But his notes reveal something deeply disturbing. The ending wasn't fixed. It changed, depending on who was listening. For those who carried a deep-seated fear of being forgotten, of fading into obscurity, the story seemed to prey on that vulnerability. They would listen, and within days, they would simply disappear. Not just from their homes, but from memory itself. Friends and family would have a vague sense of loss, a missing piece, but couldn't recall who or what it was. For others, those haunted by the finality of death, the story offered a different kind of ending. They would dream vividly of leaving, of stepping through a door into another place. They wouldn't die in the conventional sense. They would just depart, leaving their lives behind. As if they were just a story they had finished reading. As the researcher continued his work, his own writing started to fracture. The neat, chronological entries became chaotic. Dates would repeat. He'd write March 15th, then again a few pages later, as if time was looping back on itself. Names of people he interviewed, people, Ickneo, would vanish from the pages, replaced with blank spaces or smudged ink, as if the very act of writing them down was erasing them from existence. His confident, academic script devolved into a panicked scroll, the words barely legible. The final entry is where the true horror crystallizes. It's not a conclusion, but a terrified realization. He writes, "The story doesn't describe it. It introduces you." Think about that. The tale isn't a passive account of some ancient entity. It's an introduction, a handshake across time. The moment you hear it, you are no longer just an audience member. You are a participant. The story has noticed you. His notes end abruptly. Mid-sentence, the final words are just a jagged line of ink, trailing off the page. When his colleagues eventually came looking for him, they found his study just as he had left it. The recorder was still on the table, the notebooks open. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no forced entry. Everything was perfectly in place. There was only silenza profound, heavy silence where the writer used to be. He hadn't been taken. It was simply gone. Gone. The ancient cultures that buried this story held a final, terrifying belief. They didn't think the story created the entity. They believed it, invited it. The words themselves were a key, a summons. The very act of listening, of letting your curiosity guide you through the narrative, was the invitation. The moment your interest shifted from passive curiosity to active participation, the story stopped being history. It became a place, a space carved out of reality, where something could listen back, a waiting room where something ancient and patient could sit and watch. And that's why the most dangerous part of the story was never the climax or the ending. It was the moment of silence, right after, the realization that you had already finished listening, that the door had been opened, the introduction had been made, and you were now in that room with it. The story was over, but its purpose had just begun. If this story has left you feeling unsettled, a little on edge, that means it worked. That's the feeling it was designed to create. The ancient cultures believed that silence was the only protection, that by burying the story, they could starve the entity. But silence never lasts. Someone always gets curious. Someone always starts digging. I want you to comment. I listened below, not as a show of bravery, but as an acknowledgement. A way to mark that you've crossed the same line that so many others did throughout history. It's a way of saying you understand the pact you've just made. Subscribe for more stories the cultures tried to erase, the tales buried in the darkest corners of our past. And tonight, if you're lying in the quiet and you hear your name whispered when no one is there, remember, some stories don't end just because they've been told. They're just getting started.